OK。じゃあ入りましょう。いいですか？映っている？最初ぐらいは映してもらおうのかな。音も出てるかな。皆さん戻ってきたかな？ちょっと短い休憩でしたが。戻ってますか？大丈夫？みんな入ってます？大丈夫ですか？続きを始めたいと思います。ちょっと違うシステムで今始めました。ミュージアムスタッフの皆さんにカメラ持ってもらって、映していただいているというね、大変申し訳ないんですけどもね。ちょっと画像見えてるかどうか、そして私の声が聞こえてるかどうか、聞こえてたら誰かOK って言ってくれる？聞こえてますか？
聞こえてます。
大丈夫？言ってる？わかりました。じゃあこれでいこうと思います。ボリュームも大丈夫ですかね？ OK ね。はい。では、日本語で喋ってんだろうな。So, I hope everybody's back. And we'll start again. And I'll explain very briefly, very generally about the prehistory of Japan. And I would start from this exhibition of the stratigraphic model. Stratigraphy は地層ですね。地層のモデル、on this wall。これしていただいて。はい。うん。上からだーっと。上の方から。上に言わない？あ、これ自動で。あ、そうなんだ。言ったらいい。はい、いろいろ工夫しながら。ちょっと引きましょうか。うん。はいはい。Okay. Can you see this brown strips, two strips on the wall? It's about 10 meters, almost 10 meters in total, but it's too long, so it's split in two. And the left top is the ground level, the surface of the ground. And they made this deep, deep hole of the 10 meters and made the wall flat and added the resin, applied resin on surface. And when the resin is dry, they peeled it off. So what you're seeing now is a real earth, real model of the stratigraphy. 地層ですね。地層標本って言いますね。And you may notice there is a series of Roman numeral on the left side, white characters. Can you see? And that shows the order of the layer. The top is layer 1, the darker chocolate color ones, the layer 2, and 3 and 4, and so on. And these are the accumulation of the soil, and soil is made of, it's not made of, but they are from volcano. They are volcanic ash. Totally, the entire thing is a volcanic ash. And that reflects that so much active volcanoes in Japan. Japan is a volcano country. And in this area, most of those ashes are from Mount Fuji, Fuji-san, Mount Fuji or Hakone or other volcanoes around. And so many events of eruption has taken place through the history. And our ancestors, Japanese ancestors, have been living through this series of volcanic events. And it is taken granted, maybe everybody would understand that as you go down deeper, the date would be earlier, right? Shallower, later, and deeper, earlier, right? And how deep would it go when we start talking about human beings' activities? And when first human beings came into Japanese archipelago, and that was probably around 40,000 years ago, as far as archaeology would be able to prove. And the earliest phase of the layer should be around here. So X, this is 10, number 10, 10th layer. That's around 38 to 40,000 years ago. And that was a time when people, human beings, came into Japanese archipelago. This was the ground level of that time. Okay, and after that, so when you excavate the ground deep, we will find a lot of evidences of their living, like stone tools and charcoal and stuff like that. And series of layers of artifacts, material will be showing up from those layers. Okay. And let's go see this map now. Here's a map of the area around the ICU campus. On the right-hand side, there's a white area that's showing ICU campus now. And you see the meandering line, kind of little gray line all through, and that's a river called Nogawa, no river, field river, Nogawa. And those circles along the Nogawa is, oh, wait a minute. You may not be able to see, but there's another line here. This is Nogawa. This is kind of gray line, Nogawa. And another line along Nogawa, so with minute lines, are the contours of the cliff or bluff. So on the upper side of the bluff is a higher plateau, and lower side, the lower side of the bluff is a lower area. It has like what's the difference? Maybe about 20 meters difference. And so the bluff line was made by the river flow. Yeah, used to be a big river flowing in this area, and they scraped the edge and made the bluff line. And after that, the subcurrent of the water from the rainfall would spring out from the bottom of the bluff and accumulated and made the river. That's the Nogawa, small river afterwards. And that took place like maybe 100,000 years ago, before human beings came into this area. And the circles, a lot of circles of orange color or pink color along the river and the bluff lines showing the location of prehistoric sites, especially Jomon period sites. And a lot of sites have been found along this river, but not very much in the other area, the lower area or upper plateau area. You don't find too much sites, but all the sites are concentrated along the river. You know the reason why? Can you tell the reason why?
Most cities or towns should be around maybe you call them settlements, okay. Should be around the river so that they can have food to grow.
Okay, yeah, that's right. You have to have water to live, to survive. You have to have food and water, right? So you can't be too away from, go away from water source like a river or spring. So naturally, along the river and spring, you would see accumulation of a lot of prehistoric and historic evidences, or the sites are concentrated along the rivers, yeah? And it's showing here. And the space between those circles, that means, it doesn't mean that they have no site around in between, but we have not really excavated that area too. So if we go out and excavate the whole thing, you would find a lot more sites. Okay. And until the later historic period, when they discovered, they developed the technology for digging well, idone, digging well, then you would be able to survive on the plateau or lower area anywhere, as you can dig the well and get the water source. Okay, 音は大丈夫。Okay, so until then, they were mainly living along the water sources like this. Okay, the first human beings, when they came into Japan like 40,000 years ago, 38,000 years ago, or less, it was a glacial period, ice ages. Yeah? The entire earth was cold. And so the environment was quite different from what we see today. And all the plants would not survive in cold climate, except for the conifers who would survive in that condition. And very sparse conifer forest would be seen. So there wouldn't be much forest, dense forest or anything. It's very sparse, sparse forest, and grassland only. So it's kind of poor looking scenery at that time. And among those wood or grassland, there were a lot of animals walking around. And before human beings, many types of animals came in through the peninsulas, northern peninsulas. And because in the glacial period, the entire Earth is cold, and much of the water source, water is fixed as ice in the polar area or high altitude area, very, very cold area. There would be a lot of snow falling, but they would not melt, and they will be accumulating as ice. And that's what you call glacier. So naturally, the water, entire water of the ocean decreases and ocean level goes down and change the geology. The seabed today would be a land, dry land, because of this lowering of the ocean level. So like probably something like 300,000 years ago, a long time before human beings came in, there was another colder glacial period. And Hokkaido, for example, Hokkaido was connected to the continent, Siberian area. So the animals could walk down, just walk down on the ground and came into Japanese archipelago. So, and there are various types of animals at the time, but especially large type of grass-eating mammals, were prominent, like elephant. You probably heard about the mammoth. That's northern, huge type of humongous elephant. which is extinct now. But, they were coming in until Hokkaido area too. And there were another type of elephant called Nauman's elephant in Honshu area, the main island area. And other type of animal like deer, huge deers. They would be, the head of the deer should be higher than my hand, humongous, monster-like deers. And those large mammals were wandering around eating grass in herd. And the people, human beings, were chasing around the animal like that. Because there were not much food resources in plant. Flora is very poor. So there's no, you can't eat pine leaves, or pine cones. That's not edible. And so their major diet, their major food resources were totally dependent on animal meat. So they were the hunters. And since the animals were wandering around and moving, human beings also had to move, chasing around the animal. So they could not make houses, they could not make settlements to carry out the stable life. They were constantly camping. They would have tents to pass the night, but they were always moving around. So they could not carry too heavy tools, very small tools, portable tools. And that was their lifestyles. They were wanderers too. And I would show the tools that they were using. That was, of course, the stone tools, but we call them Paleolithic period. 旧石器時代というんですね。旧石器時代、古い石器時代、Paleolithic. And these are the examples of the Paleolithic tools. And you would see the number, Roman numeral on the left side, and corresponds to the numbers you saw on the wall of the stratigraphic model. So the top ones, top rows are later ones, and lower ones are earlier. And there are various stone material. They chose the stones for making stone tools. They did not use the regular stones that you can pick up anywhere. They had to use very dense, good quality stones for making sharp tools, as you can see. And can you tell the difference between the earlier ones, lower ones, and the upper, later ones in general?
It seems there's more work put into making the newer ones flat compared to the early ones, which are a bit, they look blunt.
Flat. Yeah, right. But lower ones are kind of irregular in shape, right? But the upper ones, smaller, sharper, and uniform in shape, right? And that shows the development of their technology, stone tool making and using technology. And in other words, here's another example of stone tool. These are replicas. These are the tools that I made, but the top one, the black one, black stone is obsidian. Obsidian is kokuyoseki, ne? Obsidian is a volcanic glass. It's glass, actually. It's just like a window glasses, the quality is the same as window. And it gives a sharp edge when it breaks. So it would give a good result when they use it for stone tool making, right? But you can't get this kind of specific type of stone anywhere. And there are limited sources for these stones. So they have to go there to get one of those and make good stone tools. Yeah? So that means that you can't just go there all the time. You can't just stick to that source area. You have to wander around chasing animal. So you have to be separate from the sources many times. And as a result, they have to develop a very efficient way of using the precious good material. That's called blade technique, shown in the picture right there. And I will explain that later, but it's a very efficient way of using the good material. You can take a lot of material, very thin and slender and sharp material from one nodule, a block of stone, and that's shown here. Very thin and sharp, and the uniform shape of the material is taken from the original stone through this blade technique. So they can make those what we call blades or flakes into various type of tools shown in here, like spearhead, knives, scrapers, all bladed tools. Yeah? And so on. And they developed so much types of tools. I'll explain that later too. And but in the last phase of this Paleolithic period, they had developed even further this technology, and what they made was this microblades instead of blade technique, microblade technique. It's a tiny ones. It's very small, and the same blade, but it's small in sizes. Right? And what they used for is something like this. It's a microblade point. It's about the same point, projectile point, the spearhead, but the main stem was made of bone. It's very easy to acquire as a material. And they made slits on both sides and planted those microblades, very sharp, small pieces of obsidian in a row. Isn't it? That would make one spearhead. And what's so good about this? You know, it's very hard to make one of these. But it was so efficient because, back to this one, the normal size blade, maybe from 1/5 size material, you would get maybe 40 or 50 blades. But how about these micro blades? From the same material, you can get over 100, 200 pieces. And that's more efficient because if you measure the size of the blade, the sharp edge, probably from one material, the normal blade technique would give you something like 10 meters of blade. But how about this microblade? It will go over 50, 100 meters of blade. You know, that's pretty efficient. You know, that's how they developed their technology. This lifestyle, animal chasing, camping lifestyle seems very simple, but they were constantly thinking and trying to develop their technology, develop their ideas and stuff, and were that's what they were doing in the Paleolithic time. It may look simple, but it's not. Another example is I can't see it here, but how they ate those animal meat. They would catch the animal. I mean, actually, we don't still know how they caught elephant with those spears, you know, those simple spears. How many spears you would need to get one elephant? The elephant, Nauman's elephant is bigger than normal elephant we see at the zoo today. It's a huge ones, you know. And we don't really know how they did it, but they did it. That's why they survived and gave DNA to the present human beings like us. Anyway, they caught those animals and ate the meat. How they ate the meat? They never ate meat raw, because we are finding a lot of evidences of cooking the meat from those sites. And the typical one is what we call a pebble cluster. A fist-sized pebble gathered in one spot, and they're all burnt. They show a burnt sign, like reddish color or soot or charcoal attached to it. So obviously they were burnt and heated. And so that was a stone cooking, the type of stone cooking. Yeah? And meat was cooked over the heated stone like pan. And why they had to do that, you know, it seems that they did not use the bare fire, just a simple bonfire to grill the meat. Why is that? Anyway, okay. If you grill the meat over a fire, bare fire, the fire is so hot and the surface of the meat would go black in a minute, while the inside of the meat is still raw. You know, you don't want to raw, you want to eat raw meat. It's too dangerous, very dangerous. So it contains a lot of germs and, you know, bad things for your health. You may die for it. So you want to heat it. But if you use the fire directly, cook on fire, it would just become a char, and the inside is still raw. So through many years, they have tried many things, I guess, but they have finally invented this pebble cooking device. And using a pebble, if you build fire on pebble and heat it, and still it's not as hot as fire itself. And so it will not give a black surface on the meat. But the very interesting characteristics of the stones, they would radiate something called a far infrared ray, far infrared ray. 遠赤外線って日本語で言いますね。When they were heated, 加熱されると遠赤外線を出す。And far infrared ray is a type of heat that penetrates the material. Normal heat would reflect on the surface, like you're by the fire, chimney or whatever. By the fire, you feel the heat, but that heat would reflect on the surface of your body. It doesn't come in, doesn't penetrate. But this far infrared ray would penetrate through. So by using this pebble cooking devices, the meat would not go black, but the inside will be cooked well. You know, a wisdom. Yeah? So they have developed this kind of technology too. And that was the Paleolithic life. And of course, the glacier period does not last too long. They would come every そうだね、100,000 years, almost. ですね. And that ends, the final glacier period ended about 13,000 years. ちょっとね、英語にするのは難しい。13,000 years ですね. And the temperature arose rapidly after that. And that resulted in the drastic change of environment. And those broadleaves, instead of conifers, 針葉樹じゃなくて広葉樹ね, broadleaves would come in rapidly and prevail over the land in made the forest. And broadleaves, it would include a lot of type of trees that bear fruits and nuts. And those nuts are so nutritious, and like chestnuts and walnuts, acorns, and stuff like that. And human beings with a lot of wisdom, they would use it, you know. They would not go pass through and stick to the animal meat. There are nuts exhibitions right here. Walnuts, chestnuts, and acorns, and various type of nuts. Not only nuts, but maybe tubers like yamaimo, yam type of tubers, and other plants prevailed because of the rise of the temperature. The environment was so different after this glacial period has ended. And so diet of the human beings, of course, changed from that time, and they shifted from fauna resources to flora resources, plant resources. And they also used the animal meat, of course, but at the same time, they used a lot of those nuts because they could get those nuts in autumn in quantity, and they could they could store those for a long time, and that should stabilize, somehow stabilize their diet life, ですね。ということで、their lifestyle changed, and they didn't have to chase around the animal anymore, so they started build their houses and settlements, and they would start the sedentary life from this period, and that's what we call Jomon period. Here's an example drawing of the dwelling houses at the time. It's a pit dwelling, and they would dig down the ground and make floor, subterranean floor, and they would make up a frame. They should have had so much wood resources for construction too. And the roof was covered with grass, and probably over the grass they would have put some earth too. But so this is the most popular type of dwelling in Jomon period, and later too. After Jomon period comes the agricultural period, that's Yayoi period, and mounted to Kofun period, and on until medieval periods. This pit dwelling was so popular among the normal people, and it's different from the houses we live in. The major difference is they lack the wall. They don't have the wall. You know, as you dig down the ground, you would see a natural wall, earth wall, but they didn't prepare the wall material like wood or earth or whatever. So it's very simple and very easy to build and easy to tear down. You know, and also subterranean, the chika desu ne, underground is different from surface, the surface. And as you go down into the ground, you would not get so much influence of the atmosphere, the temperature, especially. So that means if you live in this kind of pit dwelling, it will be warmer in winter and cooler in summer. It's a natural air conditioning type of house. And they would build fire inside the house. And here's a replica of the fireplace of one of the pit dwellings. The pit dwelling itself is too large to demonstrate, exhibit in the museum. So they cut out the center part. And here's a pavement of flat stones. And at the center is a cubity. You can see a lighter color. That's a fired earth, and indicating the location of the fireplace at the center of the dwelling. So, the major difference in their tools was the pottery, of course. And pottery, they never had that in the Paleolithic period. They only had stone tools or wood tools or other kinds of organic material. But here's a Jomon pottery. Pottery is made of clay. You form the clay, soft clay, into the vessel shape and dry it and bake it on fire. And it turns to a very hard vessel. And the major function of these pottery were a cooking pot. So they were living on, in the Paleolithic period, they were living on grilling meat, eating meat. But from Jomon period on, they would use these kind of vessels for cooking. So they would make a lot of soup or stew. What's the difference? It makes a lot of difference. And you go for yakiniku, right? You eat yakiniku. You like yakiniku. Everybody does. And when you grill meat on the plate, what happens? What comes out?
The oil?
What is it?
The oil from the meat?
Yeah, oil, fat. And juice, juice comes out too. And smoke comes out too. But actually, what you see is the oil and juice, but it's not just the oil and juice. It contains a lot of other elements like salt, mineral, vitamin, and all the elements that the animal used to use to survive. It's contained in the meat. And as you go to yakiniku place, you're just abandoning those good elements with oil and juice. You stick in this. But as you adapted this kind of device, pottery device, cooking pot, and making stew or soup, those elements would come out into the soup. But as you're able to drink those soup, then you would not have to waste those nutritious elements, right? So that as a result, Jomon people had more, a lot better condition of the nutritious facts, and they would be healthier, they would live longer, and they will be more stout, I guess. But in terms of health, it's a lot of, it makes a lot of difference. Yeah. And also the cooking pot was not only used for cooking, but also used for removing harshness of some of those nuts, like acorns. Many types of acorns are not edible as it is. It contains a lot of harshness. Tannin and other types of stuff. Maybe some of you might have an experience of eating acorns when you were a kid, but I'm sure you regretted it. It's so bad, tastes bad, you can't eat it. But as you boil them in pot, and the harshness can be removed and become edible. So those cooking pots, the German pottery was also used for that purpose too, a lot. So that was kind of revolutionary change of technology as they adopted this pottery device. And another revolution in technology was, you can see it kind of dark, but矢印ですね, arrowheads, bow and arrow system instead of spears. 見える?ちょっと見えないかな。近づいたら見えない。Well, I'll show you a lot of pictures later, so don't worry. But they never had this bow and arrow system in Paleolithic period. They only had spears. And what's the difference between spear and the bow and arrow system? Can you tell? Well, think about Olympic Games. There are spear throwing. They are like, you know, primitive people jumping and swimming and throwing spears. And, you know, a lot of sports are like that.
I think.
But you compete in spear throwing. What's the point?
I think
something.
Spear throwing is limited by how strong you are, but with bow and arrow, the bow helps you make the arrow stronger and make it go farther.
Right. Exactly. That's good. Yeah. And the spears, they in Olympic Games, they compete with the distance, only distance, how far you can throw. Just as you mentioned right now, how strong you are, you know.
Professor, it seems you're muted.
I'm sorry, the microphone was off, but can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, Professor.
And bow and arrow systems. And they are stronger, of course. They would give more force to the arrow than the spear. And also the important thing is the accuracy. You can aim at the small spot if you change the microphone, so now you can hear it. Okay, right. And so accuracy is the point, you know, like in the Paleolithic period with those spears, you would not be able to catch any bird, flying bird. But if you're good enough, you can, with a bow and arrow, you can catch them too. And you don't have to carry too many arrows. If you're good, you can aim at the animal and you can hit the right spot. You can just get them down. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Use my computer. Okay. So that brings a lot of change in the efficiency of the hunting too. You know, you don't have to work too much. Very good. Okay. Okay. And well, you wouldn't be able to tell how many spears you need to get elephant down. You know, by the time they're down, they look like a porcupine or something like that. So that's another revolutionary change of technology. So everything's for efficiency and nutritious facts, and you know, made their lives different. And also, the sedentary lives would allow you to own very large tools, heavy tools that you would not carry around. And for processing those acorns and other nuts, they would prepare stone tools like these mortars. 石皿と言いますけどね、皿ではなくて mortars、臼ですね。And they will mill those nuts in these kind of tools with those round stones. That's grinders and mortars. And Paleolithic people would not be able to carry those around. They're too heavy, right? And besides, they didn't have the sources like acorns and other nuts. So that's also the big difference in German period. Another difference in the cultural difference in German period is that the sedentary life would allow you to go for difficult, complicated works that would take up a lot of time and effort. And unless you settle down and you have time, you will not be able to do that kind of complicated works. Like one of those, lacquer work, urushi desu ne. Urushi is also expressed in English, Japan, but it's a traditional technology in Japan. Since German period, they have developed this lacquer work. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of technique, a lot of knowledges, and a lot of efforts. And that could have been only accomplished through this sedentary life. And other things like pottery making also, you know, you have to prepare, you have to get the clay material, you have to get some sands and mix it and prepare the clay itself and form it into a vessel, dry it at least for 1 week or so, and then bake it, you know. As a total you would need more than 1 month or so just to make pottery. And the camping people would not be able to do that. You know? So, so much difference in cultural activities took place because of this change of environment, the warming up, and the German culture would reflect a lot of those activities that I'm going to talk in the lecture in detail later. Okay, and I've been talking about the subsistence and diet and material, but also we have to think about the spiritual cultures of human beings. They're not only the material, but the spiritual culture. And these German pottery shown here, there's a lot of decorations. And some of the decorations are prominent, you know, projecting on the rim. And that doesn't look like any functional thing, you know. It's blocking your way, because these were also a regular cooking pot. These were used as a cooking pot. And another one, the big one right there. It's a lot of attached decorations on the surface, but it doesn't have anything to do with the function. You know, they were just cooking pot. And the reason why they decorated this way, we don't really know yet, but at least they had this specific idea about the world, about the universe, about their lives, and they had their own concepts that they would want to express in form. You know, that's one of the characteristics of human beings, that you have a desire, always have a desire to express your ideas into a form.
painting, sculpture, whatever that is. And that was the, we have so much evidences of that from the early, very early stage of human beings, even before Paleolithic. They have made so many things, sculpture and cave paintings and so on. And so as Jomon people, they used the surface of the pottery as a canvas. And they never showed anything real, like a human face. Well, a little bit, but not very much. Human, animal, tree, whatever you see, sun and moon and stuff like that. You don't see that much in the Jomon pottery. It's always abstract design, as you can see right here. So curving lines and circle, oblong circle, and a lot of notches and stuff. But they should be expressing something, but you can't decipher it. It's very difficult. They had their own very specific ideas and the ways of expression. Yeah, that's really interesting part of the Jomon period. So they have developed their own spiritual culture, material culture, and so on. And we don't find any evidence of warfare, fighting between groups, killing each other. We don't find that in Jomon culture. It's a very specific thing about Jomon culture, because in other period later, you see a constant evidence of warfare. So it was, well, we would call it peaceful times. Yeah? But it wasn't just peaceful, because they were totally dependent upon the natural resources. And nature changes, as you know very well. The temperature changes, climate changes, rainfall and drying. It's constantly changing. It doesn't give you a stable environment. So, and other aspects in Japan, especially, is the volcanic activities. As I mentioned before, volcanic activities give you a lot of influence because it would destroy the ecosystem, right? When one volcano erupts, the environment would be totally changed, And actually, in the latter half of Jomon period, they survived. They suffered from the volcanic activities, like Mount Fuji in this area. And naturally, they had to decline in population, and probably because they lacked the food resources. They have flourished so much into the middle area of middle time of the Jomon period, but not the later period. And the number of sites decreases rapidly, and they're going down, their cultures rather going down in quantity. But at the same time, the different quality shows up. And those are non-daily, non-regular artifacts, not the usable tools. It's many of them are exhibited upstairs, but we don't have time for that now. So please come back and go up to upstairs and look all the material too. But something that you don't use in daily life, like ornaments, body ornaments, earrings, and pendants, and some of those figurines made of clay, human figure, clay dolls, and so many type of non-usable things for daily life increases from that time. And that reflects a lot of stress, spiritual stress, not only physical, but spiritual stress on the Jomon people too. So, well, we'll discuss about that later too. Anyway, so towards the end of Jomon period, it was a bad time for Jomon people. They were having a hard time to survive. And that was the very time that people came in from the continent again a lot. And those people from like China or through Korea, they brought in the rice. It was the first time for Japan. And also this cultivation culture, agricultural culture was introduced. And Jomon people at the time were at the loss, they were having a hard time surviving. So they jumped to this rice culture. However they prayed, their God did not answer. They could not get enough food, but they found it. So they just abandoned their traditional culture of Jomon all of a sudden, and they jumped to the rice and they changed their lifestyle totally. Well, we'll talk about that later too. Okay, that's kind of the regular, general prehistory explanation. And so we would go back to the class. And anyway, there are so many other material exhibited in the USA Museum. So please come, please visit again. And as I mentioned, it's open on Wednesdays only. From 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the afternoon only. And you have to make reservation beforehand. Okay, so please do so. And you enjoy it, I'm sure. And also, I've shown only a part of archaeology section, but there's another half that's for folklore, and you can enjoy that too. Okay? All right. Okay. Okay. Of course, some of you may know already, but a lot of you would not know detail about the archaeology. And so let's start from the meaning and concept of archaeology and what is archaeology about. And why do we learn about archaeology? Why do we study archaeology? And archaeology is a study of the past, and it's about the human beings. Many people would ask me about the dinosaurs. If I tell them I'm an archaeologist, then they would ask about dinosaurs, but I can't answer because archaeology do not handle dinosaurs. We only handle human history. The beginning of the range of archaeology starts from when they became human beings. Okay, that's about 7 million years from now. But some people would say human history is like a tree, and a lot of branches, trunk, and roots, and you would appreciate flowers, flowers and fruits. Tastes good for your health, and flowers are beautiful. We would appreciate flowers and fruits, but they do not exist on their own. They could exist because thanks to the branches, leaves, and trunks and roots. It's just like that. Human beings' history is just like that. We are the present human beings, the most advanced, supposed to be most advanced human beings in the entire history.
but we have long passed. And without those past history, we could not be. Let's make it really simple. You, and including me, everybody is born from parents, you know, and without those parents, we do not exist in this world. And how about those parents? They were born from their grandparents, our grandparents, and so on. You know, it's connected. You may think that your ancestors, like German period people, anywhere in the world, you know, you have your ancestors. And if it's like thousands and tens of thousands years ago, you think you're not related. You have nothing to do with them. You know, that's none of your business and things like that. But as a matter of fact, they are directly connected to yourself. You know, without them, without their existence, without their survival, you would not be here. You would not even exist in this universe, right? So you're directly connected to your ancestors through life and through DNA. That's a sheer fact, right? So that's what we are trying to decipher. What was your ancestor like, you know? And actually, what we do in archaeology is to reconstruct the human past through the study of artifacts and features. That's the definition of archaeology. And what's artifacts? Artifacts are actually the tools that human beings created, made, and used for their survival. And features the remain of the human activities. They are not the portable tools, but the remnant of their activities. Like the simplest feature is holes. You dig the ground and make hole, like a storage hole or a grave hole, pit dwelling, that's a big hole. You know, that's the hole. And holes are not material, I mean, tools itself, but it's the remain of their activities, right? So that's features. And there's so much features too. It's not showing here. It's not only holes, but like the pebble cluster I told you about in the Paleolithic period, they made this pebble cooking, and they abandoned those pebbles and they were buried into the ground, and we excavated now. And pebbles, well, you can call it tools, they call them tools, but it's not quite the tools. You don't really work on the stone. It's just a normal natural form of the pebble you picked up from the pebble layer. So these cluster, the state of a cluster of pebbles regarded as features too. And what? Road. In the prehistoric time or historic time, earlier days, you know, you walk down times and again, and the natural ground would be hardened because you step on it so many times and becomes a road. And sometimes when we excavate the sites, we will find those hardened strip area must have been used as a road and something like that. They're not tools, they're not portable things, but they are the result of human activities and so on. And those artifacts and features are buried underground, of course, because of this gravity that Earth has. Anything, even the minute particle of the Earth, anything with a weight should fall onto the ground and accumulate. So in time, everything will be buried into the layers of soil, as you saw in the museum. And what we do as archaeologists, we go out there and find the site and excavate and find what's buried underneath. And so finding all those remain of artifacts, tools, and features, and we'll try to reconstruct the activities and lives and culture of our ancestors. That's archaeology. And also another definition would be like understanding the periodical transition and the regional relation of the culture. What is culture? Can you define the culture? Anybody? It's kind of difficult, you know. We use the word culture all the time, every day, you know. But when it comes to the definition, you know, it's kind of difficult. But I always take it simple. Well, you can make a very complicated definition and things, but I always take it as simple. It's culture is a lifestyle. Yeah. There's so much variety of lifestyles among human beings, you know, depends on the area, depends on the period, depends on race, depends on religion, or depends on environmental resources. So much differences in our human beings' culture because it's lifestyle. You know, they have their own lifestyle. We have developed our own styles according to their environment, their various conditions and traditions too, you know. So culture is a lifestyle. Like food, you know, Japanese food, Chinese food, Italian food, you know, those are lifestyles, right? Clothing and architecture and everything could be understood as a lifestyle. So that's the culture, definition of the culture, I would say. So understanding the transition of the culture never stays the same. The lifestyle always changes. You know, we know that very well, like sumaho and stuffs. They're giving so much model changes every year, like automobile, cars, you know, they change constantly. You know, that's what it is. That could have happened. I mean, that happened all the time. Even in the Paleolithic period, you know, they changed the stone tool technology and stuff. The material cultures, they always change it. So by deciphering the change and transition of those material culture, we would understand the flow of the history. And not only material culture, of course, spiritual culture and other aspects too, but things are constantly changing. So we would like to get the idea of how things changed throughout the history. And that's one of the objects of doing archaeology. Yeah? And also regional relationship of culture, regional relationship. Regional and racial differences, lifestyle differences, so obvious, but they could have various relations in between too, right? So time axis and space axis, both the focus of the argument discussion in archaeology. So we try to excavate and find evidences, material culture artifacts, features, and all the evidences, and try to reconstruct the history by looking at the change, transition of the material, and the relationship between different area of the world or among the races. ということですね。Okay. And there is another field of study called anthropology. Anthropology, 人類学ですね。And the difference, anthropology, of course, focuses on human culture. But the difference, there's an obvious difference between anthropology and archaeology, which is the time. Anthropology handles this human beings of present, living human beings. They don't care much about the past, ancestors. No, that's not their aim. But archaeology sticks to the past only. We don't handle the present living human beings. That's the difference. And anthropology is a vast area too. And it's in the history of anthropology, well, it's been treated as a natural science, human study, in the Western world. And anthropology includes cultural anthropology, and also physical anthropology, or natural anthropology we call. And that's the study of the human bones, skeletal remains. That's about the past. But the cultural anthropology handles the present human beings, the present culture, present lifestyle of the human beings. And natural physical anthropology, cultural anthropology, and archaeology would form anthropology department in the Western world. That's the original format. And anyway, so the archaeology handles the history, in the past. And so many fields are related. Fields of study are related, of course, yes, because when you think about human beings, we consist of so many uncountable elements, right? You can't really think of it. Everything is related to archaeology, because we have to study about the human beings in the past. Even in the past, human beings consists of so many aspects, so many elements, The culture, lifestyle also consists of so many things. It's not only survival, it's not only subsistence, it's not only diet, food resources, or how to cook, cooking tools. No, not that, not only that, Human beings also like to play, amusement, and also music. Music doesn't have to be amusement. They could have been very serious things like religious or ritual part of activity, but music is another aspect. So much to think about, and everything is included in archaeology. So it's a vast area, but only limited to the past of the human being history. I mentioned sociology, economy, linguistics, psychology, and everything can be studied. But you can't do it. You can't do everything all by yourself. So the very interesting thing about archaeology is we cannot stand on ourselves. Study of archaeology is not the only one. We have to be helped. We need the help of various specialists. As a matter of fact, everybody who studies about anything related to human beings would be a big help for archaeologists. Especially when we have to decipher the evidences excavated from underground. And yeah, I'll talk about that later too, in detail too. And also, I've been mentioning about the spiritual culture, right? human beings consist of not only of material, but the spiritual culture is a big part of human beings. Compared to the other animal, probably human beings has the most biggest area of spiritual culture in ourselves. And that's great things. But it's very difficult for us to study about spiritual culture through archaeology because we only have material, excavated material, tools, And can you reconstruct our ancestors' spiritual world from this one? That's the point. That's very difficult. But it's not impossible. That's possible. Because as I mentioned at the museum, human beings, one of the characteristics of the human beings is to express, we want to express our thoughts, ideas, concepts. We can't just sit still and be silent. You have to do something. You have to express, you have to make something. Even if you're making simple tools, very functional tools, a lot of ideas, your concepts will be reflected, take form into the tools. And if you can decipher those relation between the material and spiritual culture, and that's a good thing. That's what we want to do. And so many things we cannot handle directly, like not only ideas and concepts, but like sound. I mentioned about music, but how do you reconstruct the music of the past? About language. What kind of language they were speaking before they invented the characters? All the communication were done through the language, spoken languages, right? But how do we reconstruct that? We can't do that, actually. It's very difficult. Of course, there are some ways of doing it, and some of the linguists are trying to reconstruct the languages of the past. But that's one thing, very difficult. And music. You can't reproduce the music songs of Jomon people. That's impossible. But if you have something like, if you find through the excavation, find something like musical instruments, that's tools, material culture that you could find through excavation, then you would be able to reproduce the sound of the instruments. And sometimes you may be able to reproduce notes, scales, and things like that. So I wouldn't say it's impossible to handle music through archaeology. There are so much possibilities because the ideas and concepts, spiritual world would take form. Thanks to that quality, we have some evidences to go into that difficult world too. So archaeology is still in development. It's not a complete field of study, but so many things can be done in the future too. So it's very hopeful, very amusing too. All right. And I'll mention about the history of archaeology briefly, very simply. Well, if you want to go into it, you can find a lot of books on that too. And probably the first archaeology, the birth of archaeology took place in Europe in 18th century around. That's an incipient stage. And there's a guy called Winkelmann, German guy, Winkelmann. He was an aestheticist. How do you say that in English? I don't know. 美学者ですね。In today's term, art historian ですね。And his major concern was Greek and Roman sculpture, especially the Greek sculpture. you know, the marble, white, beautiful, naked form of the sculptures. And he was studying the transition of this style change of the sculpture. And well, let's say he would follow A type and B type, change into B type. And he would assume about the C type, but he can't find the C type, but he has a D type. He's lacking C type. He wants to find the C type. So what he did was go down to the Rome, I mean Greek, and excavated the site in order to find the C type. Now, that probably was the first case of excavation in the studying of archaeology, trying to dig in the ground just to find something you need to decipher the history, right? And at that time, 18th century, the classicism was kind of popular. After the Renaissance age, until the Renaissance age, the medieval period is often mentioned as darkness, you know, Ankoku no Chusei, dark medieval period. You know, they were just surviving. Most of them were peasants and you know, low-class people, and only few people were having power and reigned all over, you know, like kings and royalties and priests. You know. So for the most people, you know, it was very dark, and there was not much activities, cultural activities going on until this 15th, 16th century, that there was a reformation of religion, and you know, they started to realize that there is something interesting, something more fresh, and something more exciting. And that was the Renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth, right? So human beings were reborn at the time. And since then on, their interest in human beings arose and increased so much. And of course, they studied about this past, long time past, like Greek sculpture. They are naked, but they don't look ashamed. You know, they're so open and, you know, free, and there's no strain, there's no stress or whatever, but it looks beautiful. They just look beautiful. So they realized that, and in the earlier time, our ancestors were so free and open and beautiful. So their interest went to the human being, study of the human beings. And that's what we call classicism. And at the same time, they started treasure hunting too, because something beautiful, it may be a block of stone or, you know, just a part of sculpture, but if they give value to it, and if they think that they were beautiful, then that's going to be their treasure. So they started digging the ground, trying to find the treasures, you know, what they want. And so it wasn't the real academic study or anything at the time. And also natural history has been started to be studied, because their interest in human beings naturally developed into the environment. Just like us, you know, we were concerned about ourselves only, but nowadays we have to think about the environment, and it's so much rage now. But it was like that at that time too, and not only the human beings, but the environmental study, the natural world study, became popular too, and that's how the natural science developed in this period too. And geology and paleontology, and you know, all the early stuff, so popular. And there so their sight became so wide and wide and wide and expanded to the world. And that's about the time they went into the ocean too. You know, they made a big ship and went down to explore the Pacific area too. Yeah, that's my another specialty. My specialty is Polynesian archaeology, like Easter Island and Hawaii and stuff. But anyway, because they were so interested in the world, not only human beings, and they wanted to acquire more lands too, you know, so they sailed out so much into the ocean too, and so on. And so finally they go down, digging down into the ground, and they would find earlier stuffs, and they found up this prehistoric time, even before human beings too, you know, like a fossil, dinosaur fossils, and you know, that's the time they discovered those earlier, really early stuffs too. But as you find early stuffs like early skeletal remain, bones of human beings, and that's very different from ours. And they could have been developed from apes, monkeys, kind, or something like that. That's evolution theory of evolution by Darwin, Charles Darwin, right? And that made a big conflict with Christianity because Bible doesn't say that, you know. Well, you know about those history, but so science were always arguing with religious and priests at that time, of course. Even today, the religion is very strong. Like in the States, churches are very strong too. Some of the sects, some of the Christianity sects are very aggressive about those theories, and they do not admit the evolutional theory, even today. So, and into 19th century was a material stage, and they had accumulated so much evidences from underground, and they started to put them in order or relate them each other. And those who realized about this transition through the time axis were those guys, Thomson, Lubbock, Morgan, J. Morgan, and other guys, and especially the Montelis from France. He invented this concept of chronology. chronology を日本語で変年と言いますね。By the way, my handwriting is pretty bad, as well as my speech. Please decipher. If you can't read it, just tell me so. And 変年と言いますが、chronology, that's the transitional system through time axis ですね。And things changed, as I mentioned, you know, they realized that even the early Roman time, Egyptian time material would have been changed through time, you know, and they realized it, and they tried to put them in order. So they made the time scale with the material, with the tools. And that's really the beginning of theoretical archaeology, isn't it? Theoretical part of archaeology. And into 20th century, material study turns into event study. You know, material study is very important even today. That's the basic of the archaeology, but it has limit, of course, as I mentioned. You know, you can't really tell from this. You can tell things about this. You can really analyze this material and get a lot of data, and you can talk about it. You can make up a story, but it's not complete, you know. if you find, I don't have it here. Well, I'll show you a lot of artifacts later too. But like a stone tool, there's arrowhead. Wait a minute, I'll show you now. Okay, here we go. This is an arrowhead made of obsidian, volcanic glass, black and transparent, of the Jomon period. This is a beautiful one. You see how close I can go. It's out of focus. Okay, very small, but very beautiful one. You know, you would find it through excavation of a site, Jomon period site. But what can this tell you? What's the story about this? You know, it's difficult. You can analyze, make a close observation and analyze in various ways how this was made and how many times they have to work on this to finish up this artifact. You know, that kind of things. And measurements, weight, all the data you can accumulate. But using that data, what can you tell? What's your story? That's kind of difficult, right? So it's a kind of limit of material study. So you have to find some other methods of telling story. And that became the one of the new wave of archaeology in 20th century. And not only collecting and putting material in order, but try to decipher the story behind it, you know. And like in the 60s, Louis Binford, American archaeologist, he was also an anthropologist, but he thought up of a process archaeology that's you know, studying material and bring the result into events. You know, it's not only when, who, what, but how. You can date one of these obsidian artifacts with a scientific method, and you would be able to say it's done, made, and used by Jomon people in what period, of course. And this is arrowhead, obviously, must have been hafted onto the shaft and used as an arrow, right? But how it was used, when it was used, I mean, in what occasion, in what circumstances they were used, you know, that kind of story things you want to know. And Binford tried to find those how part by adapting the method of cultural anthropology. That's present study, right? But cultural anthropology is fascinating. You know, you can record anything. You can record sound, music, language. You know, that archaeologists are very difficult to handle. And, you know, dances and what, economy, politics, whatever that is, you can just see it in front of you because people are living and showing you everything. And so what Binford did was try to find the same material that's being used by present people. There are some people still making and using stone tools, right? And compare it with those, you know. And that would give you a lot of hints about reconstructing the invisible part for archaeologists. You know, that was one method that he thought up, and that's really good. That gives you a lot of hints, and very interesting too. But you can't say that's for sure. Even today, they were using this in various manner, how and everything you can know about it. But you cannot say that it was the same story many thousand years ago, right? You can't prove it, right? So that's the limit of this new method. So it's really difficult. I want you to understand that it's really difficult for archaeologists to finalize and, you know, tell a history story in detail perfectly. You know. So that's what we've been doing, and that's what we will be doing, you know, throughout the time. And another thing is a middle range theory. That's about the same thing as process archaeology. It's very close. Middle range means low range is the material, and high range is the history itself. You know, the middle range is some theory that connects low range and high range. That's what they say. So that's how do you interpret and link artifacts and historical facts. Anyway, so even today, they're trying to develop new methods of this interpretation and explanation through archaeological evidences. Well, I'll talk about that later too. And we started like 10 to 5. Yeah, it's still okay. Let me talk a little bit more. I will stop before 6, of course. And this is an interesting part. Variational archaeology, variation. There are so many types, so many kinds of archaeology. As I mentioned, human beings consist of uncountable elements. Naturally, the field of study in archaeology are separated, divided into uncountable aspects. Like time, prehistoric, historic, archaeology is different. What's the difference between prehistoric and historic? History and prehistory. Prehistory. That's the character, right? Written material, characters. You know? The language, not the spoken language, but the written languages appear in some time in our history. And that was the border. That's the border between prehistory. Prehistoric people did not have writing, but the historic people did. And that means this border between prehistory and history differs among various races, various areas, right? Like in Japan, that will be a little before Nara period, 7th century AD. If I go to Polynesia, that's way later, you know, like 16th, 17th century, or maybe later, you know. So that's the distinction between prehistory and history. And you know, history is long, so you have to divide it, and it cannot. One archaeologist cannot handle everything at a time, right? And also, there's a division between history and archaeology. What's the difference between history and archaeology? Archaeology goes to the field and excavate and find the material. It's a material study, material-based study, isn't it? But the history, they do not handle material. They only handle written material, the literature. ですね。書かれたもの。文献ですね。Literature is their source. They only go through books and written material. And it's really good because written material tells you so much about, so much content and so much in detail about many things. So you can go on and on forever in the field of history. But there's a limit in history. I mean, written material cannot be true sometimes. Because human beings, in many cases, they write lies, right? Especially in the earlier times, like the dynasty time and kings and those figures with power, they let their lives and activities record and write in sentences and writings and make books, records. But they may order the people not to write the bad things, only the good things or fakes. That could happen all the time, and that did happen actually. So it's difficult to distinguish those fake ones and real historical material. So that's one of the limits of the history too. And history may not tell you everything. Like there's so many writings about Edo period, early modern period in Japan, Edo period, isn't it? And so many writings and scripts have been preserved, and you can study like forever about those. But they don't tell you about everything. And if you go down to the Edo area, the center of Tokyo, heart of Tokyo area, and excavate, we will find a lot of evidences from the Edo period. And a lot of artifacts were not mentioned in the literature. And sometimes there might be conflict between what the literature says and what we find from the site. So archaeology is based on material, sheer material. So it's sheer fact, you can't lie on that. So, what? But the history and archaeology has to always cooperate, help each other too. Like in the Nara area, the early dynasties and the cities were built in that area, and there are so many evidences. Written material left, and all the records can be deciphered. And some record would tell you about a temple that's been built in what year by what emperor, and so on. But like those temples are not existing now. They disappeared. They were torn down by fire or something, and they disappeared. We can't see them now. But if you go down to the specific location and start excavating, you may find the remnant of this temple. Like when you raise up a pillar, you would place a stone, the foundation stone, and the pillar would go off and the building would disappear, but the foundation stones may remain. And if you can excavate those and find those, then you can prove that the literature was telling the truth, right? So in that way, we would cooperate together. And also there is another field called art history. And art is very interesting field of study. It's more of, well, there could be material study, but the major thing is the spiritual world of human beings reflected in form or color or whatever. That's art. And it has a history, long history. And how do you explain about the art? How do you define the art? How do you explain the beauty? It's sheer subjective stuff, isn't it? if you think this is beautiful, but maybe another people would not think so. You know, this sheer subjective. The beauty, the concept of beauty is very subjective. So it's a different field of study from history or archaeology, but also it's a part of big part of the spiritual culture. So we can't do without those. But sometimes we have a lot of conflict too. It's really interesting. Like there was a case that I heard about, and there's a temple, one of the earliest temple called Horyuji in Japan, in Hanara Prefecture. It's one of the earliest existing wooden structure in the world. And there's a pillar, the corridor around the temple, and you see the wooden pillar. And it used to be painted red, brilliantly bright red. You know, nowadays you don't see any paint remaining, except that if you go close to it and you observe the crack, you know, there's a lot of cracks in the old wooden pillar. And you may find a remnant, a tiny fragment of the pigment, the paint. And red paint at that time were made of various material. There are several kinds, maybe 3 kinds, made of iron, made of lead, made of lead, or mercury-based vermilion. 3 types. The colors are different. All of them are red, but colors are different and materials are different. And you want to decipher, you want to know which material was used for that pigment. And art historian would go up to the place and see the pigment, fragment of pigment, and they would say, oh, this is lead. he just says that, you know, he just defined that right there without doing anything, because from his experience, he could tell that it was made of lead. But archaeologists would go up with a chale, you know, glass vessel and pincet, and take the sample out and bring it to the scientific lab and analyze scientifically, chemically, and tell the data, I mean, truth. That's, you know, it's kind of a funny story, but that could happen. That's fundamentally different in art history and archaeologists. Anyway, archaeology is based on the facts and very objective. And so it's just like a science, you know. The method is science. The object, the goal is humanity, the human study, but the method is science. So it's really interesting field of study. There's no other field of study like that. And of course, there are various types, depends on periods and district, of course, time and space, right? And you can study about Paleolithic period, Jomon period, Yayoi, or Edo period, or even up till modern period. How close we would go as an archaeologist is like probably World War II. World War II is still the object of archaeology. It's like 60 years, 70 years before. But we have a lot of remains. I will have a chance to show you some pictures, but we just excavated the west side of Hong Kong last year because they're building a new building, Shinkan, new one. And before that, we excavated the area and see what's in there underneath. And we've also, we found a lot of evidences from Jomon period, pottery fragments and stuff, stone tools and stuff. But also, the most of what we found was modern things, you know, in the wartime things and ICU age period. things. It's very modern, very close things. But those were not recorded and nobody knew about those. And we found it as evidence. So it's really useful in the modern time too, not only the old age, ice age, or prehistoric age, but even today, I mean close to today, we would be able to study a lot and learn about our history a lot. Some people did study the Coke bottle chronology. Nobody remembers about the early style of Coke bottle. So that's a field of study for sure. That's one topic. You can do anything if it's a past. Anyway, so in the aerial studies, Japan, China, Egypt, Easter Island, wherever, their archaeologists are divided into various areas too. We can't just study about the entire Earth. Anyway, and also archaeology is divided into themes, and there are specialists of each theme, like art. As I mentioned about art history, art has a long history. It's a long history. It starts from Paleolithic time. They did make cave paintings, the famous one you may know in Europe, like in Spain and France, Lascaux and Altamira and others. And they're finding more and more now today. And, those Paleolithic times, they were hunters and wanderers, and they would have to survive and they would have to find food all the time, right? But they spent so much time painting of the games, especially, or sometimes human beings. They wouldn't capture any animal or any food resources by painting, right? So it looks like a waste of the time, a waste of their energy, but they did. Why? That's the point. That's human beings. Even you're starving, even you're trying to find the food for tomorrow, survival, you want to do something else. You want to express. And those cave paintings by Paleolithic people are beautiful. Actually, their drawing techniques are superb. I can't draw like that, even today. Nobody can write that except for professional painters. So it's really interesting to study about the art history. I'll show you more evidences later, but and religion is very important things too. It's a big thing, and nobody knows when they started this religion, but this is a great invention of human culture. Only human has religion, and the function of religion is probably you may see a variety of function, but I call them apparatus of happiness. Because until quite recently, so many people, normal people, are in a very miserable state. They were barely surviving. They live for food only. They would not have too much amusement, too much leisure, too much time just sleeping, or they would have to work, and gives you so much stress on your spiritual part. And but since they invented this religion, they could control themselves. In other words, self-control ですね。なんて言うんだっけ。 mind control this. You can control your mind. You feel unhappy, you're starving, you're poor, you're tired, and you feel unhappy, you feel offended. But you can control your mind with your intellectual part. You can, you can believe it. You can believe that you're happy, then you're happy. It's very simple, but that's a fact. It's a very interesting part of the human spiritual part. And of course, religion started from probably in the early days, in the prehistoric days, religion was not invented, but started from a ceremonial things, because they could not understand everything in their environment, the world. They must have had a good deal of the concept of their world. They had sekaikan. They knew about the world, but they couldn't understand, they couldn't explain so many things. Why the sun is moving, why the moon's moving, why the stars and earthquakes, thunder, rain, whatever. And even the flowers blooming and insects, animal, whatever. You wouldn't be able to explain fully. So you have to feel kind of offended too. You're living under a super power, natural power, Mother Nature or whatever. So that could be the beginning. And there is a concept called animism in anthropology and or ethnology. Animism is that beliefs that you would believe in spirits, in anything like animal or tree or whatever, in living materials, living existence, and you believe in spirit, and that's animism. That stands for animals, and probably paying respects, so much respects, and to those lives, especially animals and plants and things, were the starting point of this ritual services, rituals, activities, ceremonies. And that's the first early activity of religion. But in a later time, they invented this religion like Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, Muslim, whatever. That's apparatus for mind control. And you can become happy. Even today, you may feel you're unhappy or something happened to you and you feel down and unhappy. But you can just change it. You can believe in something and you can just change it directly in opposite way. And you can feel that you're happy. And that's a fact. It may be difficult, but you can do it. And anyway, so we have a long history of religion since the early time. And there is so much material related to religion, like the ceremonial goods, ritual goods, and stuff like that, including later Bible and all those religious material. And they have their own history. They have their own transition. Even the Bible does, in following those material transition through archaeological methods, and that could be studied. It's a great part of human history. Religion is very interesting. And it's almost 6 o'clock. Okay, I'll stop now, and we'll keep doing this theme classification of archaeology from next week. All right. And please write comments after this lecture. It's good until the midnight today. comment or question, whatever that is. And also, do you have any question or comment or things to say now? You have to. There's so much things that we don't know. Or maybe you're too tired. And today, I just talked, and you must have been tired looking at old man's face. But from next week on, most of the time you will see the slides, photos and stuff, videos through PowerPoint. I will use PowerPoint, so you don't have to see my face. Excuse me. And also, I will bring out real material and show you. Too bad you can't touch it. If you're living close like a dorm, and if you come to the campus for other classes and stuff, so you can drop by this archaeology laboratory. It's 162, room 162 on the Hong Kong west end of the ground floor. And most of the time, except for Wednesday morning, I'll be here. So you can drop by, and I'll let you touch base, and so take a chance. Any question?
I read the text a bit, and I listened to you explain the kind of artifacts you can find in the museum. Why are most of them from the Jomon period? Like, what happened after that caused, I guess, people to move away from the area?
Exactly. You can't tell what kind of artifacts you'll find until you excavate. But over 60 years, archaeologists have been excavating this area, this campus, and most of what they found was Jomon material. And of course, if you go down deeper, you would find Paleolithic period of artifacts, but we hardly had chance to go down deeper because it's a lot of work to go really deep. It takes a lot of time and effort, and labor and money and everything. So we didn't have much chance. It's only one Paleolithic site recorded on campus. And last year, we dug another part of the campus. I found just one Paleolithic stone tool. So that was the second one, and so on. So you can go down and you can find more stuffs too. But later on, after the Jomon period, we don't find any material until like Edo period. No Yayoi period stuff, Kofun or medieval things. No, we don't find those. That means people did not live here at the time. They evacuated after Jomon period. Like, there are so many conditions, geological conditions, environmental conditions would keep the people or ostracize the people. Like in Yayoi period, you have to have lowland, marshland to make rice paddy, grow rice, right? In this area, we don't have that very much of land in that condition. So probably that's why Yayoi people moved to the other area, I think, and so on, Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other question? Okay. Well, you can write that if you think up of any in a comment sheet. All right, so let's call for the day, and we will meet again the same time next week. All right. Yeah. Bye-bye.